Hello, friends. Today's special guest, Hannah Strege, was the world's first adopted frozen embryo. She was frozen for 2 years and thawed on Good Friday, 1998. Hannah was conceived through IVF. Her parents chose adoption and they adopted 20 embryos. But Hannah was the only one who survived and was born. Her work now and her story is next.
Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Friends, family in Christ, thank you so much for your support and your prayers for this podcast. Another very important topic. You know, I say that every time, I think, but this one, we need to understand, especially in the church, Christians need to understand the worldview and what's going on here with the issue of life, preborn human lives, and when life is conceived. We need to be able to have these conversations with a very ignorant, maybe sometimes, culture and people who buy the talking points of the left. We need to know how to respond to this. One way you can do it, you can go to Hannah's X or Twitter, formerly Twitter, and bring that up, guys. It's Hannah Strege. It's Strege. There we go. She inspired the first frozen embryo adoption program. She gets into a lot of great points there on X. I love some of her responses. So we'll talk to her about that in a minute. And I want to give you her book. Her dad wrote a book about her story. It's called A Snowflake Named Hannah, Ethics, Faith, and the First Adoption of a Frozen Embryo. Hannah Strege, welcome to Worldview Matters. So good to see you today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. Your story is amazing. And praise God that you have so much to share on this. And I just want to hear more of it. So let's start at the beginning now. I gave your ex. I told people about the book. First, maybe we can start with your dad and your mom. And your dad eventually wrote the book on your story. So go back to their struggle over the ethics of, I think, IVF. They decided to adopt rather than, just go ahead and share that story. Walk us through it slowly, please.
Sure. So I always like to say, that feels like their story and less of my story, because I didn't come into play until, I was, transferred into my mom. But however, they were struggling with infertility. My mom had premature ovarian failure and she could not get pregnant. And so they were looking at infertility treatments and, my mom asked if they had any embryos that they could adopt. And their doctor was like, of course, we have lots of embryos. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. And he handed them like a list. And my mom always likes to say, this looked like a list of how you'd pick your new car based off options. And that's not how she wanted to grow their family. So it had embryos separated by hair color, eye color, intelligence, race, ethnicity. And this was in 98. Like this wasn't very long ago. And they still do this to this day because they have, egg donors, sperm donors. They have everything that anybody could want. And they just expected my parents to choose. And so they rejected that and turned to the Christian community and wanted to know, what would God think of pursuing an embryo adoption program? And an embryo adoption program didn't even exist. And that's why God is so vital in our story, is because this was kind of an idea that just kind of came to my mom. And so they talked to some Lutheran pastors and some friends from their church at the time and connections. And my mom also reached out to the late Dr. James Dobson, he was my godfather as well. But he played a huge role in just saying, these embryos need to be adopted. These are human lives and they need to be given a home and a chance to fulfill that gift of life. And so my mom and dad and one of their good friends kind of came together to build what is now the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program. However, that's trademarked through Nightlight. So other people, which is Nightlight Christian Adoptions, it's an adoption agency, The Snowflakes term is used for a lot of people that have adopted a frozen embryo or a frozen orphan. But it's really important that that is a trademarked name and that's not everybody.
So I want to emphasize one point that you sent me. Thank you. We had some email exchanges, and you said your parents intentionally chose adoption rather than embryo donation. Why?
Mhm.
Because they believed these were already human lives deserving
Mhm.
of dignity and protection we would give any other child. So Hannah, why do you think, I know you've learned a lot in these last 20 plus years. Why do you think it took until the end of the 1990s for some, your parents and others, to maybe start asking ethical questions like Dr. James Dobson and others who really believed that these were human beings, human lives? And some people just say embryo and they think it's just something they can, like you said, there's a list of traits and you can, discard some, choose
Yeah.
others. Why do you think it took so long for, especially for people who understand the biblical worldview and believe God, believe the Bible, Christians, can you give us insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, IVF was very new at the time. Like Louise Brown wasn't born like too much earlier than I was. And so I think this was just also a really new concept to people. And now that it's becoming more and more of a popular option and people are experiencing more and more infertility, they're like, oh yeah, IVF, IVF's there. We can always do
Mm.
IVF. And it's creating a growing problem because people, I don't even think have any idea what an embryo is. Like they're ignorant of basic biology. And I encounter that all the time in just normal conversations with people when I explain my story to them, or just on X, as you can see with some of my exchanges. But I think it's really important to, also ask them like, why don't you think a frozen embryo is human? Why do you think that it could be anything else? And I think that really stems from a lot of people's just like their own trauma or their own, fear of what that could mean if they recognize these as children.
So you say, and I agree with, your life began at fertilization. Our lives begin at fertilization, but a lot of people don't look at it that way, which, yeah, I mean, it's confusing to me why more people don't understand, and especially what's going on in certain states, with abortion and laws. And it's just really
Yeah.
astounding to me how they minimize life, preborn human lives. So for people to think that, well, you said your mom carried you, gave birth to you, raised you as her daughter, but your life did not begin when you were transferred to her or implanted, or was born. Your life began at fertilization.
Mhm.
We need to hear this over and over and over and over again to understand the truth. Go ahead and share whatever you'd like about that part of your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think, conception, fertilization can be very, people use one or the other. I like the term fertilization just because, I was in a lab. I was created in a lab and, I was frozen in tanks of liquid nitrogen along with my siblings. And there's at least 1.5 million frozen embryos in our country alone. And that number is not accurate, David, because there's nobody actually regulating this system. There's nobody that actually has a real number. And we're not even talking about what that looks like in other countries, but our own country, we have numbers beyond numbers of children in these frozen orphanages, and they're not considered human beings. And people are just very fearful of if they become people, if they become persons in our country and with our laws, that changes the game for, the entire abortion debate as well. Because then we're recognizing that life begins at fertilization and those lives deserve to be protected under our law.
Yes, and I just want to again say kudos to your mom, Marlene,
Yeah.
who asked the question, "Can frozen embryos be adopted?"
Yeah.
Thank you. This is such an important story. Can we just transition a little bit and talk about your dad's book?
Sure.
When did that? I guess that came out in 2020. Did I read that right?
Yes, that is correct. A
Tell
terrible
us
time
about
for it
that.
to come out.
Oh, I know. COVID, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so my dad, I mean, we don't speak publicly for clout or anything like that. We speak because my story is very unique and I think it gives a different perspective to the abortion or pro-life debate because, I was not in anybody's body. I didn't need anybody's body to go to the next stage of development overnight in the petri dish. I did that on my own because I was my own human being, my own human organism that developed into who you're talking to right now. But my dad wrote this book because we had file cabinets and all of these papers everywhere of our trips to Washington and interviews we've done. And he just really wanted my story to be in one place. And he really wanted it to be in one place for me. And that just happened to be a book. And since he's a sports writer by trade, this was a little bit different for him, a different project. And he's very more, he's a written processor. He's not as much of a verbal processor as me and my mom. And so I think it was really cool to see his perspective be shown through writing this book. And him and I are actually working on part 2 because a lot has happened in the past 6 years that we wanted to just kind of get down there too.
Well, that's exciting. Thank you. I'm glad you guys are working on a follow-up. There's just so more because it's kind of a developing story, but yet your story, it was unique, true. It was true. Obviously, the top line in that book, the unique, true story that ignited a new pro-life movement. So let me ask you about this. I know this is kind of off track just for a moment, but bear with me.
Okay.
I and a lot of Bible-believing Christians who stand on the biblical worldview when it comes to life, because we can't have liberty in the pursuit of happiness if we're not given the right to life. We've been very disappointed and sometimes frustrated by the pro-life movement or movements in the United States politically. And it's like this massive game of ping pong since Roe v. Wade in 1973. Legislation gets passed. Then depending on who gets elected, it gets cut, shot down. Then legislation is introduced. Then it gets, you know what I mean? It goes back and forth.
Yeah.
This is really ridiculous on such an important and foundational topic of human life. So what are your thoughts on that? And you can say anything. No, nothing is off limits here on this podcast except for profanity, but that's not going to be an issue with you. So we're very frustrated at the political ping pong on an issue that should have been decided and not even debated anymore. Go ahead.
Yeah. Somebody described it to me in a really great way, I think. I think the pro-life community is like how we look at Christian denominations. We all believe in God and we all believe that Jesus died on the cross to save us from our sins. But we have the Lutherans, we have non-denominational, we have Baptists, we have we have all of these different churches, but we all believe, foundationally the same thing. And so I feel like that's the same with the pro-life community, in my opinion. We have the abolitionists, or we have, abortion up until a certain point maybe, or we have IVF needs to be banned, or we have surrogacy's okay, but it's actually not. And people just go back and forth on these really big topics. And I really struggle to hear one person that has all of the same viewpoints as, I do. And I'm not expecting everybody to, but we're divided against ourselves as a community. And I don't feel like we can move forward to protect life, all human life, if we're constantly bickering back and forth about what's true and what's not. And I think it really depends on where those people are coming from. If they've, some people know people that have gone through IVF and they have these beautiful babies and they don't want to say oh my gosh, they should never have been born, or maybe they know somebody that has had an abortion and that's just been really hard for them to live with and move forward and pick a side. I think people just all have different backgrounds, and that's important to recognize. But I say that I'm on the side of the child. I say that my opinion is the one that protects the child, because I don't think that there's one viewpoint that does that.
Well, I on this show, I've had Katie Faust on and Josh Wood with the wonderful organization Them Before Us, putting the rights of children before adult desires and what adults want. When you shared something at the very beginning of this conversation, Hannah, about this checklist of what people want, in a baby and all these embryos, the hair color, eye, whatever, my heart kind of sank a little bit, but that's where we are as a society, thinking that we want to take on the role of God in a way. But talk to us, let's go back and talk to us about the 19 embryos that did not survive of the 20 that your parents adopted, and what should our view be of those embryos that did not survive the thawing or the process?
My viewpoint is that we will get to meet them in heaven someday,
Hmm.
and that they're all children of God. And if you've ever seen the movie or read the book Heaven is for Real, we talk about that in my dad's book, actually. We dedicated, I think, the book in part to those 19 siblings.
Hmm.
But my parents and I named all of them, and we prayerfully considered first names just because we feel like if you've ever seen Heaven is for Real, Colton has a out of body experience where he goes to heaven and he meets a sibling that was miscarried or um, passed away
Wow.
prematurely. And he's telling his parents about this experience, and they asked him what her name was. And he said she didn't have a name because he never named her. And that really struck me as a young kid when that movie came out because I was
Hmm.
like, well, we have these 19 siblings and 19 children that don't have names. And so,
Wow.
we prayerfully considered it, and it was just a
Amazing.
really great way to honor them and just humanize them a little bit. And I think that's what embryo adoption does. I think,
Absolutely.
you can always go through an embryo donor program, but I think like if we're dealing with children, David, I think children need adoption. Children need a home where there's a social worker that's going to go vet the family, vet the house, vet everything. A donor program doesn't do that. Any one
Hmm.
person can just walk into an IVF clinic and request an embryo.
Yeah.
That could be a registered sex offender, and there's no protection for that child. That is scary. That's
Yeah.
scary that we live in a world that can happen and that these children are not protected. Um, and that just terrifies me for what our future can bring if we're not on top of this as Christians.
Yeah, it's not regulated like we would want it to be, and you're not exaggerating. I've seen headlines, I've seen stories of
Mhm.
whether it's a gay couple or a single individual man, a registered sex offender, adopting a child or through IVF or all these different things. You're going, wow, what have we come to, and where is this going to go? So
Mhm.
let's bring in something a little bit more. I don't know. It's just very interesting. You met George W. Bush,
I
and
did.
that was early on when you were very young. Do you remember that? Tell us about how that happened.
Yeah, we got invited to the White House to stand behind President Bush for his first veto. And I think I was about 6 or 7 years old. And
Okay.
at the age I couldn't have cared less, to be honest with you. I like really wanted to go to the pool, and I like didn't realize how big of a deal that was. But like looking back, it was such a like surreal experience to get a picture with him and be there for that veto and have a president that was like, these embryos are not spare parts, and we are not going to be doing embryonic research on these children. And then to have us children there in the audience or behind him, standing behind him, like these were children. These children were once frozen embryos, and now they are
Wow.
here and they're standing beside me. Like that was such a powerful experience. And I knew that even then, but it was really cool.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I was still pretty young, but I was also the oldest, because I'm the oldest and first adopted frozen embryo. And so I think the second and third snowflakes are a couple years behind me.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because I wanted you to explain in the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years or more, people have a different understanding and definition of the word snowflake. It's
Yeah,
not a good thing like this. Anyway, so
no.
explain that was an adoption program or that was a program for embryos. Tell us about that. So in other words, your dad's a snowflake named Hannah. That's not an insult on you or
No.
explain snowflake, please.
Sure. So the name Snowflake is a registered trademark name through Nightlight Christian Adoptions, which is the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program. And so
Okay.
children or embryos, children that are adopted through that program are called snowflake babies. And so they're all assigned a number so you can know how many snowflakes have been born to their program. But that
Awesome.
that name has also translated into something that of an insult, but also
Yeah.
donor programs sometimes will use the term snowflake, and that's not really accurate because, they weren't adopted through that program. It was still their life was saved, but it's still a little bit different. But in the book, my dad explains how that name came to be, and it was a line from the Lambs players in I think Hotel del Coronado, where one of the actresses said, in the intricate design of each flake of snow, we find the creator reflecting our individual human hearts. And so when my parents and their friend who Ron Stoddard, who was helping them start this program, heard that line at the show, they were like, we now have the name of our new program, the Snowflakes program, because it just seemed like a great fit.
Awesome. I'm glad you explained that. I love that quote. And every snowflake is unique and different. It's individual. I love that. So I want to go back to something you sent me and quote you. And let you expound on it a little bit. You say, I believe we need to separate the dignity of children conceived through IVF from the ethics of the technology that created them. Please share more about that, Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, I think people get the wrong impression of me sometimes. Like they'll comment on stuff I post and be like, so do you wish you were never alive? Or do you wish that your parents never adopted you? And it's like my biological family's decision and my adopted parents' decision to give me a chance at life is not a reflection on how I view my life. I view my life as a gift from God, and I could not be any happier or prouder to have been given this chance. Like 1 out of 20 is like confounding, actually, to actually know that God chose me out of those 20 to actually have a voice in this. I'm incredibly grateful. That doesn't mean I'm not sad, but I don't like people using my story to fit their agenda, because I'm always going to side on the embryos in frozen storage, because there's nobody out there speaking for them. I don't know anybody out there that's speaking for them. I hear people speaking about, they'll be like, well, what about the children internationally or in foster care? Like, don't you care about them? And it's like, yes, of course I care about them. I went and got a social work degree. Like, that's my whole life. But also, like, I need to be the voice for the voiceless right now and the people that can't actually speak for themselves. And so I think it's really important that we see these embryos as human life, because if we don't, we're in a load of trouble.
So let's get back to what you're doing. I mean, you do counseling. Where did I read that you're a licensed clinical social worker? And we already gave your website. You're the founder of Wonderfully Made Adoption Services International, and that website will be ready within the next couple months. But talk about your, being a licensed social worker, and you do counseling as well. Share a little bit about that too, because you're helping a lot of people, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. I work full time as a therapist, and then I also opened a private practice for counseling as well. And then my nonprofit is kind of like my whole dream and reason why I became a social worker, is because I really wanted a place where people could come to a website, people could contact me, and have a place where if they needed adoption support, adoption counseling or consulting, policy analysis, or if they ever wanted my input on lawmaking or voices like that, they had a place where they could reach out to me and consult. But I really just wanted a place where, when you adopt from just any adoption program, they're really good at walking alongside you and holding your hand up until a certain point. But once that child is in your hand, or that child comes into this world, you're kind of alone. And so I really wanted a place, and I actually did my whole master's thesis on this, actually, or my capstone project of adoption's not second best, and we need the tools to actually support families who want to adopt, instead of just being like, oh, here you go, here's your child, good luck. Because I think the more support we actually give families, the more they'll want to adopt and open their homes to any type of orphan. I think we have an issue in our society where people are like, well, I want my child to look like me. I want my child to have my DNA, hence the whole IVF and reproductive technologies. And so I really want to start normalizing adoption. I want more adoption propaganda, and that's where my nonprofit's coming in. So I'm really excited.
Yes, very important. Adoption. One of the things that pro-choice, quote unquote, people don't support. Adoption. They don't support abstinence, adoption, but they support abortion. So go figure that one out. But let's get back to the Imago Dei. Every human life born in the image of God, created, designed by God, a loving creator, uniquely and individually in his image. And let's talk about what you shared, that You believe Christians need to think carefully and prayerfully about these practices like IVF and donor, egg, and sperm conception, surrogacy. We're seeing some nightmare stories, horror stories on some of these cases now. And I know they are the worst of the worst, but there's going to be more, and more of it's going on just because of the evil in the human heart. But you say, I oppose creating more embryos than parents are willing to raise, intentionally freezing embryonic human beings, destroying embryos, and treating embryos as property or commodities. Now, I just see dollar signs that this is it's a business, and it's kind of getting out of control. But let's bring it back to the biblical worldview and share more about your concerns in the Imago Dei, Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines of what you just said, I oppose surrogacy. I oppose ICSI. I oppose donor egg or donor sperm. Because again, we're seeing a lot of things in the media that, children aren't knowing who they can date. If a sperm donor has fathered multiple children in the same area, like these kids have to live with that. They have to go to high school with these kids. Like they might be in their same district. Like that's concerning.
Wow.
And it's all because a parent or an adult had this dream of having a child. You're allowed to have a dream of wanting a child, but that child has dreams and a whole life they have to live too. And so to put your concerns in front of theirs is not child-centered. It's not Christ-centered. And I think it's becoming a huge problem.
Friends, this went by so fast. I can't believe it. I have another, dozen questions I wanted to ask you. We may have to do a follow-up if you can, Hannah, sometime down the road. But I want to make sure people can go to Amazon, get the book, A Snowflake Named Hannah. Look for her Twitter or X account, just Hannah Strege, Strege. Look her up. You can have conversations. You can contact her there. And just thank you, because you emphasize what is in the best interests of the child, and emphasizing we are human at fertilization, conception, those two words, not at some other stage. So we've got to understand the ethics here are very important and hold to our biblical worldview and get this information out there. Thank you so much. God bless and protect you, and continue the work that you're doing. We really appreciate your voice, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very important subject, you guys, and we got to have a follow-up with her. So much more to talk about. It's a very important subject, and we got to get this out there. God bless you, friends, and as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. See you next time.